Greetings. Here we are at the National Quilt Museum. I'm Rachael Baar. I'm the curator for the museum, and I'm so excited today. We are with Denise Labadie, and Denise had a recent exhibition here at the museum called Stone Portraits and Sacred Stonescapes. Now, if you didn't see this work, you have missed a treat. So we're going to use this opportunity with Denise to be able to talk about her work, how she came up with the idea, how they're created, and maybe even get in a little insight on what Denise is working on now. So let's get started. Welcome, Denise. How are you?
Hi, Rachel. I am just great.
Good. Well, we're so glad to be able to talk with you today. I know that when people first saw your work in our galleries, it's always that, how did she do that? So let's start from the beginning. How did you get started with using these sacred ruins and stonescapes and portraits? How did you think, okay, let's recreate this on a quilt?
So when I turned 40, my husband gave me a trip to Ireland to stay with some people that he met on business. Huh? And in the process, just before leaving, he gave me a book. I think it's called a Day in Ireland or something like that. And I opened it up to the stone circle, and I'd never looked at stones twice before. And I just felt shivers go through my body. So I called the people up and said, can we go see this stone circle? And they said, sure, find out where it is and we'll go. And they just touched my heart so deeply. I've been back a few times to see them. And then this was also at the time that I wanted to get into art quilts because I'd had a sewing business for about 25 years. So I took a class with Jean Neblett, who taught about working from a photo. And now I did make my first quilt using her technique, but I did not use it again. I created my own. And so I just found that I just couldn't get enough of the stones. I had to go back and get more and more and more. And I now have a friend that I met on a second or third trip over there, Grania McElligott, and she's my stone hunting buddy, and she's been hunting stones her whole life. And so we just go and hunt the fields and just drive around and find the stones. Wow. And so then I thought, well, now I've got my love of sewing, which I've fell in love with the first time I saw my grandmother's sewing machine, and the love of these stones. And I thought, I'm just going to merge them.
Wow. Well, of course, the results are just amazing.
Thank you.
The way the light kind of bounces and you really see the depth of the entrances on some of your pieces, or just the texture. How do you create that texture of the actual stones, the rocks?
So I look at every quilt I do as a challenge, and every one has different aspects to it that I try to create in the fabric. So then I started using reverse applique, and then I started using turned edge applique and raw edge applique, and found that I could just build these stones with multiple layers of fabrics. And then the grounds, I started using strip piecing, and that evolved to sometimes using raw edge strip piecing. And then in the ring of Brodgar that we've talked about, I have a really choppy effect that I started using, chopping up the fabric and putting it in and stitching it. I don't use nylon netting to cover stuff like some people do, which, I mean, it's fine, but that's not my thing. And so every time I just look at finding different things to create the picture that I want to replicate and the emotions that I felt when I was there and things like that.
Well, you certainly have mastered this. Tell us a little bit more about Ring of Brodgar. Is that how you pronounce it?
Ring of Brodgar is a stone circle. They're some of the oldest stones in the world. Those tall stones are like 20 foot tall. And they're granite, and how did these people carve these angles into them and everything? It's just incredible. And so that was the first quilt I tried using a really chopped up fabric for the landscape. And oh, and I didn't mention that I paint the fabric.
Yes, I wanted to talk with you about that, because I know that you do all that is done by you. You're hand painting everything, or also you dye the fabric.
I don't dye.
You don't dye? Okay.
No, I don't do any dyeing. And the reason for that, when I first started painting, was that my son was really young and we didn't want the toxicity of the paint.
Yeah.
And I mean, of the dye, I'm sorry. And so, but then I found all these different techniques I can use to get the using flour and water resist or glue resist or whatever to get more layers on the fabric. And you can keep doing that and layering more and more. And the paint I use is Set a Color by PBO, which is transparent paint. So it just, the layers just bring out so much more depth into my stones.
Well, you certainly have created that, and again, I'm fascinated by the light that you that are in your pieces, because so many times it looks like there's a small entranceway, or there are stairs going from one place to another, but then you can see kind of these little glimmers and peaks of light. Talk to us about how you're able then to make that so real.
You really have to pay attention to the gradation in color. So like in the Ring of Brodgar, that was the sky was one big piece that I painted, and there are lots of bubbles and whatnot in the sky, and that was because I paint on plastic, a very thin plastic that bubbles up.
Oh.
And so those all stay in the paint and in the fabric, those bubbles. And so I get wonderful effects in my skies that way. So sometimes I've painted skies wrapping fabric around a pole and paint it, and I just get these kind of like striations going every which way. But the light and shadowing and perspective, and even down to some of the tiniest details, can make or break a quilt.
Well, then let's go on and talk about Margie.
Margie Priory.
Yes, because that's going up those stairs, or going up, and then you see the sun kind of peeking out, and
now that was a photo taken by a Scottish photographer, and my husband found the photo online and said, "Oh my gosh, why don't you try this one?" And so he contacted the photographer, because I would never use a photo otherwise, and most of them are mine. And the photographer said, "Great, go for it and send me a picture when you're done." And he was thrilled with what I did. But that one was interesting. The challenge was trying to make the side walls look flat, but still make them look like stone walls. And so I did jagged cut of all the fabrics and just laid them on over one another. And then, but then the stairs, that had to be a different technique to pop the stairs and not let them blend into the walls. So the stairs are all turned edge applique, but I had to be careful with the tops of the stones had to be lit in a different way than the front of the stones, for example, to let the light coming down, and then there's slow gradation all the way up the stairs into that light. And so the also the stones at the top into the light are also just raw edge, because that gives a flatter appearance than the turned edge. And the turned edge really pops edges. And like my latest photo, this is the one I'm working on now.
Oh, wow.
And this one has all this lichen on it. And so I had to paint fabric that would look like lichen. So these are the first couple stones that I've made again. And the fabric for the lichen was done with flour and water resist, because the flour and water will crackle once it's dried on the fabric. It cracks. Glue doesn't crack. It'll dry, but it won't crack. And then here's another of the stones.
Oh.
And so I just like to look at each one and go, okay, how in the world am I going to do this? So that's usually how I approach each one.
Yeah.
And so I look at all the fabrics that I've painted, and then I just start moving forward.
Did you work on one piece from start to finish, or do you have several pieces that you
I only work on one stone quilt at a time,
Okay.
but I've got a lot of nieces who've been getting married, and I make them quilts for their wedding present or for birthday or whatever. And so sometimes I'll set aside and do something like that, or maybe I'll make a shirt for myself, but I only work on one stone quilt at a time.
So what's next for you?
I have classes next year in Wisconsin at the Woodland Ridge Retreat, Hudson River Valley art workshops, and Kansas City. And then I just got word this morning that I'm being asked to go back to France to the Biot exhibition in Lyon. And
Wonderful.
I was invited before, but because of COVID, everything got cut off. They held it this year, but we just couldn't travel. So that'll be next year. Oftentimes, I've had questions from around the world, and I've even offered help to some people, you know, who would never be able to come to my class. That's been really thrilling. And but if anyone ever answers or asks me a question, if I don't answer, it's because I didn't get the email. And I'd like to emphasize that, because I always will answer emails. And I love sharing any ideas to help somebody else be able to create what they want to do.
That's wonderful. And I know our viewers are going to appreciate that. So be watching your email box. I got a feeling you're going to be getting some email questions about how you do your beautiful work. So thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Okay.